Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Polk, and the focus is ups and downs in Tennessee. The year is 1838. Polk is serving as Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, but he's looking for another opportunity. He's thinking about running for governor in his home state of Tennessee. In fact, he's the featured speaker at a large political gathering in Murfreesboro in August of this year. About 2,000 people showed up. He gives a fiery address, very pro-Jeffersonian and Jacksonian bona fides on display. The real question was about somebody else in the party. The former governor, William Carroll, had served for 12 years in two different stints as governor of Tennessee, very popular amongst the Democrats. Would he consider running? This could potentially block Polk's bid. Well, Carroll showed up while Polk was giving this particular address, and so people just asked him, and he said at the moment, citing ill health, that he would not run again for the Democratic nomination that year. And then everybody converged on Polk. Well, if Carroll's out, are you going to run? Are you going to run? And he announced his intent right on the spot that he was seeking the governorship of Tennessee. Well, when he launched his campaign, he wanted to make it very clear where he stood on the topics, ideological, political views. He was a Jacksonian through and through and was frankly challenging anyone to tell him otherwise. He said when he launched his campaign, "In what have I changed? I opposed Henry Clay on account of his odious federal doctrines and his coalition with Mr. Adams, and I oppose him still. I opposed the high tariff policy, and I oppose it still. I opposed internal improvements by the general government, and I oppose them still. I supported the removal of the deposits, and I have not changed my language or my opinion in relation to that great measure. In fine, what single point is there involving the principles of the great Republican Party in which my course has not been uniform since 1825, when I was first honored with a seat in Congress, down to the present day? Look, you can vote for me, don't vote for me. I am a Jacksonian. I am not a Whig. You're going to know exactly what you're going to get if you put James Polk in the governor's seat in Tennessee. The question is that what the state wanted? They had put a Whig, Newton Canton, in the governor's seat over the last couple of elections. The Whigs were on the rise in the state and across the country. Cannon was going to run again. So the question is, what did the people of Tennessee want? Well, this would be a very comprehensive campaign to find out. Polk rode his house to all corners of the state, giving speeches just about every day throughout the campaign, except for the few months he had to take himself out of the race, because he had to go back to Washington to finish off his last session as Speaker of the House. He was anxious to get that done with so he could come back and campaign in Tennessee. His organizational skills were key to this campaign. James Polk was not a great orator, but he was a great debater, in large part because he was almost always the best prepared on almost every topic. A local observer said at the time that Polk was the first great stump speaker, always full of his subject, ready to retort, sophistical, quick to capture and turn the guns of the enemy against him. Adroit in avoiding an issue whose result must be unfavorable, he was very effective in getting his points across on the stump. He was also very strategic in this campaign. He went about encouraging other popular Democrats to run for office, including ones that hadn't run in a while, because he's trying to drive up the turnout across the state for all the Democratic positions and help his own rise for governor against the general rise of the Whigs across the state. He also put another element in his own political machine as he finally got a Democratic press organ. The Whigs had really been out front in getting the focus of the newspapers in Tennessee to favor their political positions, and Polk went out to recruit Jeremiah Harris, who was an editor of a pro-Democrat newspaper in Massachusetts, to come to Tennessee to take over as editor of the Nashville Union. It was another element in the campaign strategy, a very effective one for James Polk. Well, it was a close race. The hard work of Polk, though, did persevere in the end, as he beat Cannon by about 2,700 votes, about 105,000 cast, and he got about 20,000 more votes than the Democrat in the previous canvass. So this was a really effective campaign, and it was a major victory that caught the attention of the press across the country, because mostly the Whigs were on the rise during this campaign. The Michigan Free Press said of Polk's victorious gubernatorial campaign one of the most astonishing political revolutions which the ballot box ever witnessed. Victory was not brought about by the ordinary means of accomplishing a political triumph. It was the achievement of a political campaign, the best planned and the most valiantly fought that ever distinguished a popular election. This was a big deal for Polk, Speaker of the House, a big victory now as the governor of Tennessee. There was only one problem coming up next. The Tennessee governor was a really weak position. Didn't have the veto, had a really small staff. In Tennessee, it was really all about the state legislature. Now, the good news was, as Polk won his office, the legislature flipped to Democrat in both houses. So he had a chance to get stuff done, but it was going to be through influence, not through his own efforts, because he just didn't have that much power as governor of Tennessee. Now, he tried some particular cases in his agenda. He was really opposed to the state bank, which had cut off specie payments. This was anathema to Jacksonians who believed in hard currency. And Polk wanted to threaten the charter of that state bank if they didn't resume those specie payments. In his gubernatorial inaugural address, he said that a solid and substantial specie basis, that was the important thing for banks. Beyond this, banks and banking facilities are an evil. An excess of paper circulation gives a fictitious value to property, paralyzes the industry of the country, produces extravagant habits of living, and excites a thirst for wild and adventurous speculation. It was something that to be fought in pure Jacksonian tradition. But again, he didn't have the power, and the state legislature debated this for months and eventually decided not to move forward on legislation. Polk was also trying to get the legislature to fund some of his in-state internal improvement initiatives. Got very few of those through as well. In his term in office, frankly, very little accomplished while James Polk was governor of Tennessee. It didn't diminish his efforts. He was fighting every single day as a workaholic, because that's the way he went about things, kind of to his poor wife's dissatisfaction, because she wanted to enjoy the social aspects of the gubernatorial role. But frankly, Polk couldn't be bothered. He told her at one point, you could not lose half a day just to go and dine. Well, eventually he would go out, certainly once in a while, but mostly he was all about the work. 1840 now rolls around, a new presidential contest is in the mix, and Polk's name was in the conversation, not for president. That was going to be Martin Van Buren, was going to get the renomination for the Democrats, even though his presidency had been really crippled economically, but the vice presidency was potentially available. They were thinking about might drop Richard Johnson, who's the incumbent VP, and Andrew Jackson was among those keeping Polk's name in the conversation, potential vice president. The Democrats met in convention. Van Buren was nominated or renominated for his post, but they were silent on the vice president. He decided not to make a formal nomination for VP. So this was kind of a risky scenario, just kind of hanging out there for Polk. So he decided to take his name out of the race. Don't consider me. And he went on, which is probably a good thing, because Van Buren was trounced in the fall election against William Henry Harrison, who would become the next president. Well, the rise of the Whigs nationally and in Tennessee, making a real question mark whether or not Polk could be reelected as governor. That came around in 1841, and he went up against a young man, 31-year-old James Lean Jimmy Jones, really tall, skinny guy, who was very solid in his Whig tenets, but completely opposite from Polk, not only politically, but also personally. Polk was all about detailed policies, one after another after another. Jones was all about storytelling. He was a folksy guy, very gregarious. So they were the opposite politically and personally, and they crisscrossed the state together, speaking for hours in one part of the state after another. In fact, they would go on and off the same day in virtual debates constantly. It was exhausting. It took its toll on both of the candidates. They eventually traveled to almost every corner of the state, and in the end, Jones came out the victor. Won by about 3,000 votes out of about 100,000 cast, and all of a sudden, James Polk was out of work. Decided to reopen his law practice with his brother Bill. He and his wife also made another big investment. They bought an 880-acre tract in Yalobusha County. Signed the majority of his slaves here. This would be his principal investment on the personal side. He was also looking for that to fill an empty spot in their lives because he was sterile, likely due to the operation he had to remove urinary stones when he was a young boy. looked out for his nieces and nephews a lot, but he and his wife Sarah really wanted a child of their own. And when Polk's brother Marshall died, they decided to actually bring his son, their nephew by the same name, Marshall, into their home, and they basically raised Marshall as their own child. From a political standpoint, once again, Polk's name was certainly out there. He was briefly considered for a U.S. Senate seat. That did not come his way. Still in the conversation as vice president for the Democrats, potentially in 1844, but he didn't want to wait for that. He decided to throw his name back in the race to run against Jones again for governor in 1843. And it was a repeat campaign, same topics, same stories, politically, personally, very, very different candidates. 2,300 miles were covered by both candidates on horseback over the course of 4 months, and in the end, he had the same result. He lost by about the same amount in the race. This was a big risk for Polk because now he was a two-time loser, kind of damaged goods in his home state. He had taken the risk and now he's suffering from it. He actually went into seclusion. Him and Sarah went offline for a couple of weeks trying to figure out what does he do after this loss. He has damaged his national prospects, but he came out of that couple of weeks energized. He still felt he was the best candidate to be vice president of the United States. When the Democrats came together to nominate their new ticket in 1844, he would be nominated, but it wasn't for vice president. But all that's a story for another day. That is James Polk, Ups and Downs in Tennessee, from the life of James Polk. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.